black woman walks into a restaurant, badged, armed, and on a mission. A cop calls her a threat and tries to kick her out. We didn't know. She was a U.S. Marshal there to arrest his boss, the police chief. What happened next stunned the entire town. It started like any ordinary afternoon in a quiet southern town. Warm breeze, lunchtime crowds, and a popular restaurant filled with chatter and the clinking of silverware. But in just a few minutes, the calm would explode into confusion, confrontation, and a viral moment no one saw coming. Deputy U.S. Marshal Rhonda Evans stepped into the restaurant with calm confidence. She was there for a specific reason, to carry out a federal arrest warrant on the town's police chief, Harold Green. The charges? Serious. Corruption, evidence tampering, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. She wasn't alone. 2 other deputy marshals accompanied her, all in uniform, with badges clearly visible. Now here's where things took a turn. As soon as Marshal Evans walked through the door, a local patrol officer, who was off duty but in uniform and chatting with the hostess near the entrance, took notice. He didn't recognize her, or perhaps he didn't want to. Whatever the reason, he didn't approach her with curiosity or professional respect. He approached with suspicion. "Ma'am, do you have a reservation?" he asked sharply, stepping in front of her path. "No, I'm here on official business," she replied, cool and professional, showing her badge and credentials. Instead of acknowledging her authority or stepping aside, the officer narrowed his eyes. "You're making people uncomfortable. You're a threat. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Those words hit hard. A threat? Here was a trained U.S. Marshal, someone who had taken down drug rings, served dangerous warrants, and protected federal witnesses, being called a threat simply for walking in the door. And let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Rhonda Evans is a black woman, standing in full uniform, being treated like an intruder rather than a fellow law enforcement officer. Bias? Disrespect? Both. As tensions rose, a few heads turned inside the restaurant. Some diners looked confused. Others watched closely. And the officer? He wasn't backing down. His hand inched closer to his duty belt, while his tone grew firmer. "I said you need to leave, ma'am." But Evans didn't flinch. "I'm a deputy U.S. Marshal," she said clearly, lifting her badge again. "And I'm here to arrest Police Chief Harold Green. Now step aside." Boom. That was the moment. The officer froze. A silence fell over the area. People stopped chewing. The very man she was there to arrest, Chief Green, was sitting calmly just 20 feet away, finishing a steak, completely unaware. Before the chaos, there was clarity. Marshal Rhonda Evans had woken up that morning knowing this would be a high-stakes operation. The target wasn't just anyone. It was Police Chief Harold Green, a man with deep ties in the town, powerful allies, and a spotless public reputation, at least on the surface. But behind closed doors, an investigation had been brewing for months. Allegations of misused city funds, covering up misconduct by his officers, and even destroying body cam evidence had reached the desks of federal investigators. After a mountain of evidence, a federal judge signed off on a warrant. Marshal Evans and her team were tasked with delivering it. She didn't enter that restaurant for drama. She didn't come looking for confrontation. She was doing what the law demanded, what justice required. Evans had reviewed the plan. Walk in, confirm Chief Green's location, serve the warrant, and escort him into federal custody. It should have taken 5 minutes. Simple, professional, quiet. But the moment that officer labeled her a threat, everything changed. Her presence had stirred something deeper: bias, fear, and perhaps even shame. Now, the room felt tense. Evans stood tall, her voice firm. She'd dealt with cartel members and fugitive standoffs. But being doubted by a fellow officer while in uniform? That stung differently. The second marshal with her stepped forward, beginning to record on his phone. Not for social media, but for accountability. If things escalated, they needed proof. The officer, now visibly nervous, asked again who she was. She repeated, "Deputy U.S. Marshal. I'm here for Chief Green. You're interfering with a federal operation." And just like that, the restaurant turned from a lunch spot to a live theater of justice. Customers whispered. Some began recording with their phones. A waitress stood frozen with a tray. And at the center of it all, a woman on a mission, refusing to be disrespected, dismissed, or derailed. Moments later, the restaurant manager approached, asking what was happening. Evans calmly explained everything, and the manager wisely stepped back. Then came the big moment. The chief looked up and locked eyes with her. For the first time, he realized who she was and why she was there. His face dropped. He grabbed his napkin. He stood, but it was too late. Evans signaled her partners. They began moving toward him. A mission that had almost been blocked by ignorance and prejudice was now back on track. But what happened next would make headlines around the country. In every viral moment, there's a turning point, and this was it. As soon as Chief Harold Green realized who was walking toward him, the confident look he had at the lunch table disappeared. His fork dropped. His napkin hit the floor. For a second, it looked like he might make a run for it. But Marshal Rhonda Evans wasn't there to negotiate. She and her team approached quickly, flanking the chief's table. One marshal read aloud from the federal warrant, while another moved behind him to secure the area. Green began to protest, his voice shaky. There must be a mistake. What is this about? But Evans remained calm. Chief Harold Green, you're under federal arrest for corruption, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. The words echoed across the restaurant. Silence. Every eye was on the scene. Customers froze mid-bite. Phones were out recording. Servers stopped moving. And the local officer who had called Evans a threat, he was standing in shock, realizing he had just tried to remove a federal agent arresting his own superior. As Green was placed in handcuffs, he pleaded with Evans under his breath. You don't have to do this here. Not in front of everyone. Evans looked him straight in the eye. You abuse your power in front of everyone. You're being held accountable the same way. That line hit like thunder. It wasn't just about the arrest anymore. It was about what it represented. A law enforcement leader being taken down by the law itself. And the one doing it? A black woman, a federal marshal, standing tall in a space where she was almost denied the chance to do her job. They escorted Green out of the restaurant through the main entrance. No back door. No secret exit. No special treatment. Outside, news crews were already gathering, tipped off by social media. Evans handed Green over to the federal transport unit. Then, she turned to the cameras, gave a short statement, and left without fanfare. Back inside the restaurant, the mood was a strange mix of confusion, respect, and disbelief. Customers who had been skeptical minutes earlier now applauded softly. Some approached Evans' colleagues to thank them. But for Marshal Evans, it wasn't about applause. It was about doing the job, even when obstacles come from unexpected places, even from within law enforcement itself. And the local officer? He stood off to the side, clearly shaken. He had unknowingly tried to block a lawful federal arrest. While he didn't interfere physically, his actions were caught on camera and would spark major discussions in the days to come. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a statement. No one is above the law, and justice wears many faces. It didn't take long, minutes, not hours, for the video to blow up online. One of the diners had posted a 90-second clip on social media. It showed the tense moment when Marshal Evans revealed she was there to arrest Police Chief Harold Green. The caption read, "Cop calls a black woman a threat at lunch. Turns out she's a U.S. Marshal there to arrest the police chief. You can't make this up. Flush face fire hashtag justice served." That clip spread like wildfire. On TikTok, it racked up over 4 million views in the first few hours. Twitter, now X, exploded with reactions, debates, and praise for Evans. News outlets picked up the story by evening. By morning, it was headline news on national broadcasts. Marshal arrests police chief after being called a threat. Bias in blue. Local cop tries to remove U.S. Marshal. Justice served with a side of irony. People couldn't get enough. But it wasn't just the drama of the arrest. It was the symbolism behind it. Here was a black woman in law enforcement being dismissed, disrespected, and called a threat while doing her job by another officer. And yet, she stayed professional, composed, and focused. Social media responded with a tidal wave of support. Hashtags like hashtag #SheIsTheLaw, hashtag #RespectBlackWomen, and hashtag #NotYourThreat trended worldwide. One comment that went viral read, "This is why representation matters." She didn't just do her job. She showed what real law enforcement looks like. Civil rights organizations chimed in too. Groups like the NAACP, the National Action Network, and several black law enforcement associations released statements applauding Evans for her courage, discipline, and grace under pressure. But the story also raised tough questions. Why did the officer assume she was a threat? Why wasn't her badge and authority recognized immediately? How often does this kind of bias play out, but without cameras rolling? As more angles of the video surfaced, body language experts, legal analysts, and commentators all weighed in. The moment became a national conversation about race, gender, and respect within law enforcement itself. Meanwhile, Marshall Evans stayed silent. She didn't post online. She didn't seek interviews. Her department issued a short statement. Deputy Marshall Evans was acting on lawful authority during the arrest of Police Chief Green. The situation at the restaurant was handled with professionalism and integrity. But the silence only made the moment more powerful. She didn't need to speak. The footage spoke for itself. As for the officer who called her a threat, an internal review was launched by the city police department within 24 hours. The mayor publicly stated that an investigation will determine whether misconduct occurred and if retraining is necessary. One thing was clear. This wasn't just about one arrest anymore. It was about what happens when power collides with accountability and when assumptions crash headfirst into reality. And the whole world was watching. The arrest might have been over, but the aftermath had only just begun. As Chief Harold Green sat in federal custody, the town he once ran like a private club was in full crisis mode. Residents were stunned. City officials were scrambling. And the local police department was suddenly under a microscope. Within 48 hours, the city council held an emergency meeting. Public outrage over the arrest, and especially over how Marshall Evans had been treated, couldn't be ignored. Citizens packed into the town hall, demanding answers. Some were furious that their police chief had been operating above the law for so long. Others were embarrassed by how a visiting federal officer had been disrespected on their soil. Mayor Lisa Fernandez stood before the crowd and issued a rare public apology. To Deputy Marshall Evans and the federal law enforcement community, we are sorry. What occurred in that restaurant was not reflective of the values we claim to uphold. This city owes her not only respect, but gratitude. But words weren't enough. The city soon placed the local officer who called Evans a threat on administrative leave, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. The officer's name wasn't officially released, but his face was already familiar thanks to the viral video. While some defended him, saying he may not have recognized federal jurisdiction, the majority opinion leaned hard on the side of accountability. His job was to ask questions, not to jump to conclusions. One retired police lieutenant said on a local radio show, "If you see a badge and a weapon and hear the words U.S. Marshal, your job is to assist, not obstruct." Meanwhile, more disturbing information about Chief Green began to surface. Investigative journalists uncovered years of misconduct complaints that had been quietly settled or swept under the rug. Several officers under his command admitted they felt pressured to falsify reports, ignore body cam evidence, or go easy on certain connected individuals in town. Turns out, the federal investigation wasn't just about money or paperwork. It was about a system of corruption that had been thriving behind a wall of silence. And the person who finally broke that wall? A woman the system almost pushed out of the room. In the following week, multiple city officials resigned or were placed under review. A temporary police chief was appointed. And the restaurant where it all happened announced new diversity and de-escalation training for all staff and security. The community, shaken and exposed, began the painful process of reflection and rebuilding. For Marshall Evans, it was just another day on the job. She wasn't seeking headlines or praise. But whether she liked it or not, her name had become a symbol for justice, for professionalism, and for what law enforcement should look like when it works the way it's supposed to. And across the country, people were still watching. As the headlines began to fade and the town settled into a strange new normal, a bigger conversation took hold, not just in that small southern town, but across the entire country. People weren't just talking about the arrest. They were talking about what led to it and why it struck such a nerve. Because this story wasn't just about one corrupt police chief. It was about how someone like Marshall Evans, clearly qualified, clearly professional, was treated like a suspect, not an officer. That moment captured on video, being called a threat while holding a badge, resonated with millions. And not just because it was dramatic. It was because it revealed something a lot of people experience every day, but rarely see taken seriously. Bias doesn't wait to hear your story. Bias speaks first. In interviews across news outlets and podcasts, experts began breaking it down. Civil rights attorneys, retired law enforcement officers, and activists all pointed to the same issue: implicit bias in policing, even within the ranks of police themselves. How many times has someone in uniform, especially a woman of color, had to prove over and over again that she belongs? Asked one commentator. Marshall Evans didn't just walk into a restaurant. She walked straight into a wall of assumptions. And yet, her response wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was calm, clear professionalism. That's why the world respected her. Not just for doing her job, but for how she did it. Her story also reopened a wider discussion about how law enforcement views authority. Shouldn't every officer, regardless of race or gender, be trained to recognize federal authority without hesitation or judgment? Should the presence of a badge and credentials require more than just a quick glance and a harsh label? The video led to more than just online discussions. Departments across several states began launching internal reviews of how their officers are trained to interact with federal agencies and how they identify possible bias when responding to situations. It also sparked renewed attention to the low numbers of Black women in high-ranking law enforcement roles. For every Evans, there are hundreds of capable women being overlooked, questioned, or discouraged before they even get a foot in the door. A group of young girls in a nearby city even wrote to Marshall Evans after the video went viral. In their letter, they said, "You made us feel strong. You showed us that we can do anything, even when people doubt us." Evans, though still avoiding the media spotlight, later released a short written statement. "I didn't ask for attention. I just did my job. But if this moment helps someone see things more clearly, if it makes it easier for the next woman behind me, then it was worth it." In one afternoon, one woman's courage exposed cracks in the system and reminded the world what real justice looks like. Weeks passed, then months. But the impact of that one moment, caught on camera in a quiet restaurant, didn't fade. It lived on in headlines, in training rooms, in classrooms, and in conversations that reached far beyond that small town. Marshall Rhonda Evans returned to her regular duties, avoiding interviews and turning down TV appearances. She never tried to become the face of a movement. But like it or not, she had become something more than a federal agent. She had become a symbol of restraint, justice, and the kind of leadership people want to see in law enforcement. In response to public pressure, the city launched a new bias awareness training initiative for all its police officers and city employees. The department also partnered with federal law enforcement to improve cooperation protocols, so no future marshal would ever be questioned for simply doing their job. But most importantly, change began to take root in people's minds. Schools invited officers and federal agents, especially women of color, to speak with students. Law enforcement panels across the country used the green arrest as a case study on what happens when assumption overrides professionalism. And Evans' name was often at the center of those lessons, not for how loud she was, but for how calmly she changed everything. Meanwhile, former Chief Harold Green remained in federal custody as his trial date approached. Multiple charges were still under review, and investigators discovered that Green's corruption stretched further than originally thought, including ties to campaign funds and illegal data deletion. And the officer who called Evans a threat? He quietly resigned from the force. His actions were never officially labeled misconduct, but public trust in him had crumbled. In one town hall meeting, A resident put it bluntly. You're trained to recognize threats. That day, the only threat was sitting with a stake and a badge. And you missed it. Evans herself never responded directly to the officer. But those who knew her said she forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because she refused to carry the weight of his mistake. In the end, her silence spoke louder than any speech could. A local mural appeared downtown weeks later. It showed a black woman in uniform walking through a door, with lights streaming in behind her. On the wall beside it, in bold letters, it read, "Not a threat, a force." That's what she had become. Not just a name on a badge, but a force for change. The day Marshall Evans walked into that restaurant, she wasn't looking to make history. She was just there to do her job. But in doing it, with dignity, strength, and unwavering professionalism, she reminded the world of something powerful. Real justice doesn't yell. It walks in, stands tall, and gets to work. And sometimes it wears heels and a badge that, if stories like this inspire you, make you think, or just leave you speechless, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the truth behind the headlines. Justice has a face, and we're here to tell its story.